They were all examiners of the Royal College. They were all at the forefront of knowledge with respect to general practice. The college has its collective heart in the right place, but every single one of the doctors I recorded struck me as being...
Today's guest is Professor David Pendleton. Some of you might have heard of Pendleton consultation model. He actually authored the book New Consultation. Hi, David. How are you doing?
I mean, I'm fine. Thank you very much. And thanks for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure to be with you.
How did you get into doctors' communication, David?
I wanted to do a PhD and I was casting around for a topic. And for some reason, the topic of doctor-patient communication came to mind. At the time, the only thing that was available around doctors' communication skills was a book by Pat Byrne and Barry Long, who had done audio tape recording of medical consultations in general practice. And they had simply itemized an awful lot of skills and behaviors that they saw taking place. There was no sense of what makes a good consultation. There was merely a description of kind of what goes on and how you can describe it and so on. And it was all done from audio. So I thought, well, okay, there's a couple of opportunities here. Maybe if we could somehow define what a good consultation looks like, that might be a significant step forward. And why don't we, if we're going to use recordings, why don't we take a step forward into video and therefore see what's going on in the consultation as well? So that seemed like a kind of opportunistic reason to get into that topic. But someone was pushing me a few years later as to why the attractiveness of doctor-patient communication at all. And I found myself saying, I'd been asked the question probably 10, 15, 20 times, never really come up with a good explanation, but I found myself saying, almost as if someone was whispering in my ear, that when I was a very small boy, my mother was nearly killed through medical negligence, and my sister was killed. She lived only 2 days. And it was medical negligence in the context of general practice in the 1950s that led to that one death, and actually the deaths of 5 other babies and 5 mothers. Fortunately, my mother didn't die. She was the one of 6 pairs that didn't. And so I think lodged somewhere deep in my psyche was this thought that maybe doctor-patient communication is not a nice to have, but a have to have. Something here really matters. And I've no idea whether that's the real reason, but what I do know is that those things took place, and that the thought since then has been, it must have had a profound effect, even on a little boy.
You've used that to do some benefit in avoiding other things in the future, especially for doctors who might find it difficult to communicate. And it's quite sad when somebody has been a victim of negligence. And this is something that many doctors really are upset when this happens as well. Tell us about how did you go and learn the consultation and then teach it?
This is a story of extraordinary kindness and generosity on the part of general practitioners. I went to, I'm sitting in my wife's study. That's a picture there of Magdalen College, Oxford. But I went to Brasenose College, Oxford, and the college doctor was a guy called Mike Kenworthy Brown. It turned out that he was the scheme organizer for vocational training in the Oxford City. And he introduced me to a man called John Hasler, who was the regional advisor in general practice for the Oxford region, and a very senior luminary in the Royal College of GPs. And Mike Kenworthy Brown introduced me to John. John welcomed me with open arms and asked me, what sort of things would I want to do? And I said, and I described, I'd like to make some recordings in general practice consultations. I'd like very much to work with your colleagues in general practice to help me define what a good consultation looks like. We could use the research literature to help us with all of that and so on. And John basically just threw the doors of general practice open to me. Mike and John and the 6 doctors who allowed me into their consulting rooms to collect data for my doctorate were just extraordinarily kind. And of course, not surprisingly, they were the authors on the book. So there were people like Theo Schofield and Peter Tate and Peter Havelock and others. It's a story of courage, kindness, generosity, on the part of those GPs who welcomed this, spotty oik who didn't really know much about anything, and gave me the opportunity to find out with their help and guidance.
That's amazing. So you got into looking at how doctors were consulting in general practice, and when you actually was observing and recording, was there anything that stood out to you?
I did a number of studies from my recordings. I was touched really by the way in which those doctors blended the hard-edged with the soft-hearted. That they are all smart people. They know their stuff. They were all examiners of the Royal College. They were all at the forefront of knowledge with respect to general practice. But every single one of the doctors I recorded struck me as being simply kind, caring. The college's motto is to blend knowledge and care. Sapienda, it's a Latin motto, but the point is that it blends the two elements of science, cum scientia caritas, and I thought that they exemplified it, frankly. And the other thing was that they had time for me and they had time for their patients. It isn't that they were luxurious in time, it's that they took the time. It's that they were able to have 15, 20-minute consultations if they could also have 2 and 3 minute consultations and understand the difference between them without being safe or unsafe or unfair. And I thought that they really struck me as being in control of their professional lives, simply because they had taken their time to hone their skills.
In general practice, a lot of things have changed since the COVID pandemic. Nowadays, consultation is being done remotely, and this is a predominant form of consultation. And as a patient yourself, and maybe you've experienced it, have you been analyzing how things have changed?
My sense is that the world of technology has started to change quite significantly a number of different professional practices. I'm a psychologist. For the second half of my career, I spent my time running a psychology-based consultancy in the commercial world. And we started flying as business psychologists, flying all over the world to assess senior leaders one-to-one. I ended my career doing most of it online, keeping our carbon footprint small, keeping their costs down. But actually, I was concerned at the start that we would lose an awful lot in the quality of communication and the quality of interaction. I became convinced by the end that we really weren't losing very much. Yes, there are visual and vocal cues that sometimes you'd like a little bit more access to, but my sense is that just in the way that the world of business psychology has been transformed by the internet and so on, so general practice has as well. And my strong belief is that if you look at the quality of attention that a professional brings to any interaction with a client or a patient, then that quality of attention makes all the difference. It's not the medium that makes the difference, it's the quality of attention that does.
That's a great answer. Was there a point in your career when you thought, maybe I need to pivot and do something bigger, or what happened that made you change?
I'd understood that really the career that I'd launched myself onto wasn't really a career at all. It was an interest. It was an academic interest. It was a research interest. And it felt important, that I was often sort of in the position that Gandhi was in, when he was asked about Western civilization, and it was, what do you think of Western civilization, Gandhiji? And he said, I think it'd be a really good idea, and I often found myself saying the same thing about, what do you think about doctor-patient communication? I found myself saying, I think it'd be a really good idea. But it was that sort of slightly sort of light-hearted response, which was a manifestation really of the fact that doctor-patient communication matters. Lives can depend on it, but there's no career structure for people who are interested in that. You could go into psychology lecturing and as a sideline have a special interest in this. You could go into medical school as a teacher and maybe again have a particular specialty in that. But what I wanted was something to feed my family. And so I needed to think quite hard about where would I invest my time and invest my career. And I'd done a number of part-time jobs, which I'd kind of laced together loosely into a full-time salary by putting together a 2-day-a-week fellowship at the RCGP and a 2-day-a-week fellowship at the Oxford Regional Vocational Training Scheme in general practice, and then I found odd bits of consultancy, but it all felt a bit sort of hand to mouth. And I therefore decided I'd need to find something a little bit more permanent, a bit more stable. Went to the King's Fund, which then had a thing called the King's Fund College, sponsored by King Edward VII's Hospital Fund for London, as it was at the time, and an acronym from before the days of the NHS. And I got a fellowship there, and out of that, I got headhunted by a firm of business psychologists in Bristol to come and join them as a consultant and ultimately as a partner.
When you actually transition, were there any transferable skills or what you learned that made you special in what you were doing in business psychology?
You know, there is a strong element in business psychology of doing assessment of individuals. I'd done some work for the RCGP membership exam, which again are assessing individuals. I'd done quite a lot of work on recording and providing people with video-based feedback. You know, those rules that people talk about almost didn't make it into the book. They were almost left on the cutting room floor, but we found that people were afraid of feedback until we could make it safe for them. And so we created the things that have become known as Pendleton rules, really to make the feedback process safe so that people could focus on the content rather than their concerns about the process. And so all of that transferred really well. The ability to listen to people about the problems that they're facing was something which I had seen GPs do all the time, and I found myself doing in exactly that way in the world of consultancy. And if you think about it, those 7 consultation tasks, find out why the patients come, you know, think about ongoing problems and so on. What I found myself doing was kind of working through that 7-step sequence with my commercial clients in the commercial world, in almost exactly the way as a GP does in the consulting room with their patients. So there was an awful lot that was actually generalizable. Plus one other thing, and that is that I had developed a healthy respect for creating an evidence base. And psychology and medicine share that as a preoccupation, as a concern, that we don't just sort of come up with half-baked smart ideas and fads and fashions, but rather we try to build on the evidence that's available. So all of that generalized incredibly well. It wasn't a difficult transition.
That's great to hear. So there was a parallel. And yeah, GPs, we are problem solvers and we diagnose issues and then make recommendations. When you use that in other parts of your professional career, then it really landed very well from what you said. Tell us a little bit about your experience as one of the board trustees of the RCGP. What was it like?
I'm a great fan of the college. I don't think the college is a perfect institution, but then show me one that is. But I do believe that the college has its collective heart in the right place. What it's trying to be is the voice of general practice, both back to its members, but also to the other institutions surrounding the National Health Service and to the NHS itself. It also tries to represent the population of general practice in the press and so on. But it's a very complex organisation. It is a standard setting body, it's an examining body, it's a lobby group, it's a charity, it's a commercial organisation. You know, all of these things are wrapped into one wrapper. So it struggles to do all of those things equally well. And there are sometimes it does some of those roles better than others. And so what I found myself doing as a trustee of the Royal College of GPs is absolutely supporting its aims, trying to bring my exposure to large organizations, complex organizations all over the world, trying to bring that experience to what is in fact a quite small organization, but a monumentally complex one. I could take you to organizations which are literally 50 times as big as the RCGP, but half as complex. So trying to keep our collective eye on our aims, on the ball, as it were, but on our aims and on our values, proved to be a real challenge. And yet, what I did find also was that the college was responsive to well-made arguments, responsive to challenge. But I think that there were a couple of thoughts that I still have that concern me, not just about the college, but about the NHS as well. And that's the extent to which all of these medically related bodies are essentially bureaucratic. They'll never get one person to make a decision if they can find 20 to make the same decision at the same time. It's the world in which committees rule. And I am monumentally concerned about that because A, committees diffuse responsibility, so we don't know who's accountable. B, they obfuscate arguments. They're supposed to tease them apart, but actually what I think they do is hide the core of positions that need to be understood. But the most important thing of all is that a committee has a way of slowing down decision making, which needs to be much, much faster, much more efficient, much slicker, and so on. So I found myself from time to time saying, let's disband this committee completely and put one person in charge, maybe two, of making the decisions in that area. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. So two big themes of the college. One is to look after members' interests. And the second is to have a slick organization that supports that effort to look after members' interests. So, for example, there will be a focus on what is called the first 5 years of membership, the first 5 years in general practice. Young, idealistic, often quite tired young GPs, because not only have they got a hell of a workload to keep up with now, but they've just come up at the back end of a strong and rigorous, exhaustive training and development program. But now they are fully fledged and they're partners, but they've got quite a strong burden to bear. And so there's a sort of focus in the college on those first 5 years. And then another is, the organization also needs to run. So there are people looking after finance and IT and so on and so forth. And what I used to try to get people to do was to say, can we identify, please, who is accountable for bringing about change in this area? I've just written a blog for BMJ Leader in which I'm asking exactly the same thing about the health service as a whole. We have an aspiration to bring down 7.5 million waiting list. Who's accountable for that? Is it the Prime Minister? If so, that's a silly thing to do. The Prime Minister can't do it. Is it the Health Secretary? Well, he can't do it either. He's not a medic. He can't do it. Is it the head of the NHS? Is it the CEO of the NHS? Really? I don't know. The point is, I don't know who's accountable for that. Neither does anybody else. And if the method of accountability is the ballot box, that's really inefficient. You only get one go every 4 or 5 years. Or is it a legal case, or a judicial review, or a commission of inquiry? All of these are completely crazy as accountability mechanisms. So I want to know who's accountable, who gets a chance to make decisions in that area. If you take, I've spent 25, 30 years working in the commercial world. And if I were to go to British Airways and ask, who's accountable for the decision to buy Airbus A350 aircraft, it's a multi-billion-pound investment. It needs to be safe. They need to work well. They need to make sure that the organization can afford it, and so on and so forth. But there will be one or maybe two people who are accountable to the chief executive for getting that decision right. Now, they can call on the expertise of many other people if they choose to do so, but that individual or that small group are accountable for those things. And it's they who need to lose sleep over those decisions. I'm concerned that the lessons that Roy Griffiths suggested in the 1980s, in a letter to Margaret Thatcher, this principle of general management, that it seems again to have become lost in the ether. And so we need to know where accountability sits. So it is a long way from your original spine of the question, tell me about being a trustee of the RCGP. But these are the thoughts which came flooding to me, in contrast to the commercial world, where decisions that are taken are just as big, just as complex, but there is clearer accountability there than there is in the world of medicine.
I think you've touched on really an important subject.
The situation that I think we get ourselves into, I've often characterized as anyone can say no, but nobody can say yes. In other words, anyone can object. And if there are enough people saying no, 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 then that decision doesn't get taken. But there's no one with the power, authority, to say we are going to do this on my say so. Now, of course, with that should come accountability. You can't just make these decisions in a sense with no consequences. But it seems to me a principle of a mature organization that we can identify whose job it is to make a particular decision, give them the authority to make a particular change happen. They can choose to involve people. They don't need to dominate in order to make those decisions happen. But at least we then know who to monitor, who to ask about progress, who needs empowering to make these decisions. And we can go back in the event that a decision was taken well and recognize and reward, or we can go back and learn if we know that that decision's been taken badly. But the thought that we have to overlay all decisions with large bureaucratic processes reminds me of a poster I once saw on one of my colleagues' walls in Oxford. It was a picture of a tortoise with the caption that read, "Lucky I'm going so slowly because I may be going in the wrong direction."
So I think you've got really deep experience in the leadership, and having come across leaders in various sectors, what are the traits that you found among those who are great compared to those who are just good leaders?
There are certain traits associated with more effective leadership, but they're rather general. Rather, I think the better question, if I may, is what is it that those leaders do that succeed well? And what is it that the leaders do that don't succeed anything like as well? I think the first lesson that I've had to learn is that leadership comprises really three domains. There's a strategic domain, which is all about tomorrow. And it's quite vague and it's quite general, and it's got very few facts in it because it's about the future. There's an operational domain, which means that leadership in the operational domain is full of facts. It's all about today. It's all about the urgencies and plans and tactics and behaviors and goals and Gantt charts and project plans and all of that to make things happen now. And then there's an interpersonal domain, which is all about leadership of the people who are going to come with us on the journey. So if you like to think of a simple way of thinking about that, the strategic domain is a bit like the head, which figures out the way to go. The operational domain is a bit like the hands, which gets stuff done. And the interpersonal domain is like the heart, which looks after the culture, climate, feelings of those people involved. And at the heart of that, which you can imagine as a Venn diagram, at the heart of it is what I've called leading. And by that, it's a bit like the nervous system, if you will. It senses where the attention needs to go into those three domains, and it sustains effort. It keeps up the effort until sufficient progress has been made. Now, in that Venn diagram, 3 overlapping circles, there are 7 zones. And I've identified, in the consultation, remember, there were 7 tasks. And what I've identified is 7 tasks that leaders need to do. I didn't consciously want to find 7. It's the way it worked out. But therefore, I've identified the leadership tasks that leaders need to do or get done by somebody. So they're things like setting direction, planning and organizing, creating alignment, and so on. Now, these tasks are sufficiently different from each other that it's really hard to find any one leader who's equally good at all of them, or at least good to a high level. You can find people who are kind of modest in all of those areas, but to find world-class performance in those 7 leadership tasks, I'll say this. I and my colleagues have assessed literally thousands of leaders all over the world. We have never found one who's world-class in all aspects of those leadership. And we've assessed peers of the realm, lords of the realm. We've assessed people who run big multi-billion-pound organizations as well as small family-run businesses. We've looked at people on various continents. We've never found one. Now, that's either the world's worst sampling error or there's something there that we need to think about. And so what we argue is that a wise leader not only understands what these leadership tasks are, but they recognize that they can only do 1 or 2 of them to a high level, maybe a couple more to a reasonable level, but it's really hard to be equally good at all of them. So what people have to do is know what they bring to leadership, what they can develop, and where they need other people around them to bring the contributions that they don't bring. It's a philosophy that I've called working with complementary differences. So I tend not to talk much about diversity, but I do talk about complementary differences. So I'm actually talking about a very similar topic. What I'm saying is that if I'm no good at planning and organizing, and by the way, Edwin, I'm really not, it's not false modesty, I'm really not very good at it. But I'm not bad at setting direction. What I need to do is to find the person who is good at planning and organizing and put them right next to me in the team, and then learn to depend upon them and bring them in and have them from time to time take control when it's into the area that they're good at and I'm not. And incidentally, I've come across leaders who have understood that process incredibly well. I worked with a guy called Peter Erskine, who was tasked with creating what is now O2, the mobile phone company, out of what was then British Telecom, BT Cellnet. It was a terrible mobile phone company. Peter Erskine, within 4 years, had transformed it completely and turned it into O2 and then sold it to Telefonica of Spain for 27 billion euros. So it was the most amazing transformation story. And when Peter tells the story himself, he says, I'm really good at marketing. I'm really good in the operational domain. My mantra is deliver, deliver, deliver. But I'm not very good in the strategic domain. So the first person I hired was a strategy director. I put him in the next door office to me. And by the way, Peter also had in the finance director someone who was brilliant in the interpersonal domain, a guy called Matthew Key, who incidentally followed Peter as CEO of O2. So he intuitively understood this and made it work for him. There was a triumvirate at the top of O2, yes, led by Peter, but Peter acknowledged that he needed all 3 senior major contributions to have the leadership be complete.
Playing to your strength is one of the underlying things I've noticed among the top players. They know all their strength and they keep playing their strength, and that brings additional value to the organization where they're working. So tell us a little bit about, in your case, when it came to building your consulting group, how did you go about starting one? Because it's quite difficult to take the risk and go and start your own one.
Let me make a connection just before I do that, if I may, Edwin. Think about those Pendleton rules. Why do we start with good points first? Well, we want people to build on their strengths. We want people to understand what they do well, not what they're good at, but what they actually did well in this consultation. And if we look at several consultations, we begin to see a pattern emerging. Ah, you're the kind of guy who gets these sorts of things done really well, but you struggle much more with these over here. Yeah. So let's think a little bit about how to play that, how to handle that. Now, I used exactly those same principles when reviewing the strengths and limitations of an individual leader or a leadership team. So it's not gratuitous. It's not free floating. These things all fit together. We're trying to say we can make systematic progress, but that comes by building on strengths, not by not facing up to limitations. You need to look at them with exactly the same care and attention that you look at the strengths. But I could say that either way around. You need to look at the strengths with exactly the same care and attention as you look at those things that are not done so well. So we've got to analyze both dispassionately, take the emotion out of it, see it as almost like detective work. Let's work out what this person does really well, where they can develop because they have the potential to do that, and where they struggle much more and what we should do about that. So it's what I call work with, work on, and work around. Yeah. Now, in starting our own consultancy, I'd worked in two consultancies before that. So in a sense, I could learn from my own personal experience. I rather selfishly at one point, maybe about halfway through my career, decided I didn't want to work with plonkers anymore. I wanted to work with people I valued, people I liked, people I'd feel proud to field to my clients. And two married couples started the Edgecombe Consulting Group. My wife and I, and another couple, Phil and Sharon, who sadly, their marriage didn't make it and neither of them were able to stay in the business. But we started there and we had several years of success, just trying to build out from there. I'd also spent 2 years living in Hong Kong, so I had a bunch of clients there, one of whom was Cathay Pacific Airways, and so they flew me out all the time to work with them, and we lived there for 2 years because they have had me go out and try and work with the cabin crew community who'd been on strike and had sort of fallen out of love with the management team. So I went to try and build a better climate. And so coming back to the UK, we had an established base anyway. And we spent our time really trying to do 2 or 3 things in parallel. One was service our existing clients with our existing portfolio of offers. Things like psychometric feedback, team development, 360 feedback, things like leadership development programs and so on. But then we also were trying to develop tools and ideas. So the idea that I mentioned of these 3 leadership domains and so on was something that I came up with around 2003, 2004, and started to write about. And we started then to develop tools based on that. So we developed a 360 feedback based on that. We developed an assessment framework based on that. We recruited psychometric profiles, interpreting them in terms of those leadership tasks. So we could ask questions like, what does your personality profile suggest you may bring to leadership in terms of achieving these 7 tasks? Where does it suggest that you may have untapped potential, and where might it be much more of a stretch for you to make progress? And therefore, we could talk about who you need to work alongside, how you need to collaborate with them, and so on. And of course, not all differences between people are complementary, but similarly, not all similarities are complementary. If you've got 2 people who are highly assertive, you can bet your life there's going to be conflict, even though it's a similarity. So what we were trying to do was to figure out how to take people who are different from one another and blend them into leadership teams that work to challenge and support each other, and where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that was the kind of process. I'd say it was a process that's probably characterized by 2 steps forward and 1 back most of the time. We made loads of errors. We kept launching initiatives that we really hadn't fully thought through and had to kind of unpick them and start again. We made all the classic errors. But I'm glad to say that that business did pretty well. Jenny and I ran it for 20 years, and now we've handed it over to the next generation, and we did that almost 10 years ago. And Edgecombe continues to exist and continues to develop the same set of ideas, building on tools, creating platforms, and so on. So, and of course, it does things in the medical field as well. So, for example, it has a Dr 360 process, and it's a very successful one. It continues to do really well. It's constantly being validated and revalidated and so on. But I think that if I had to put my finger on, to the extent that we were successful, and I think we were moderately successful. I don't think we were a kind of rip-roaring success, but I think that we did more right than wrong. If I had to say, what is it that allowed us to do that? I think it was firstly working with some extraordinary people, people whose values, whose intelligence, whose experience, and whose capacity for team working, all of which were considerable, allowed us to not just to make progress, but to learn from our errors as well as our successes. I think the second thing was we had understood the power of evidence, and we tried to build out from the evidence base which psychology provided. We also had a couple of processes that I do commend to many organizations that don't have them. Firstly, we had a rigorous quality assurance process. No report came out from our business unless a second pair of eyes agreed that it was okay. No assessment report, no survey feedback, nothing came out without a second pair of eyes. No proposal to a client. All of them needed a peer review. And I never had to fire anyone from our business, but I got closest when someone didn't do their peer review process. And they only made that mistake once, because I did put the fear of God into them. But I was very clear that unless we have quality, we have nothing. So we had to look after that. So peer review was one thing. And the second was the kind of real love of learning. I can honestly say that my colleagues and I love present tense, to learn. And sometimes that's not comfortable, but my sense is if you make a mistake, the one thing that turns that positive is to learn from it. And if you succeed and you don't know why, you've missed another learning opportunity. So we need to understand both the successes and the failures in the same sort of detail as I mentioned earlier.
In life, there is no failure, it's more feedback. So you're always learning, and that personal growth you get, nobody can take it away from you afterwards. So it's like, as we're learning and growing, we're piecing together pieces of puzzles, and then we get the full picture. So tell us a little bit about your own leadership style.
I'm quite good in the strategic domain, and I'm quite good in the interpersonal domain, but I'm not so good in the operational domain. So my leadership style starts with a real sense of purpose and vision. I wanted Edgecombe Consulting to take the world of work so seriously. I always started with the view, work matters. If people lose their jobs, they don't just lose their livelihood, they often lose their sense of direction, their purpose, their self-esteem, and so on. When people retire, they find that transition difficult. Why? Because they are no longer the person they thought they were. When they go to, and when people say, what do you do? And they say, oh, I'm retired. You know, it's work matters. And we give the best hours of each day and the best years of our lives to our employers. So I think that it's incumbent on all of us to make those hours, days, years count. And our business was about the world of work. We were trying to make it possible for people to love what they do to the extent that it doesn't feel much like work anymore. I can't remember, this quote is attributed to many different people, some of them musicians, some of them sportsmen, some of them business people. But the quote is, if you love what you do, you never do a day's work in your life. Now, it's not quite true because you can end up exhausted doing the things that you love. But you get the sense of it. You know, if we can make work the sorts of place that people love to be, then actually we take an awful lot of the drudge out of it. And one of the things that I've written about recently in a book that I've written called Work-Life Matters, you know, people talk about work-life balance, and I don't understand that, because firstly, work's included within life, so you can't balance a part of the whole. So, but I know what we mean. What we mean is something about home and work, and we somehow need to keep them, people claim, in balance. Well, I think that's the wrong dimension to be worrying about. If what we've got to do is go home to recharge our batteries because we're completely depleted at work, I think we're missing a trick. What I'm interested in is the balance in our work life. In other words, our life at work. What's the balance between those things that give us energy and the things that take it away at work? That's the balance I'm interested in. Yeah, the balance in our work life. And so my leadership style tries to make work meaningful. I keep trying to explain what we do matters to people, and how and why it matters. And therefore, I want to celebrate stories where people tell us the kind of difference we've been able to make to them, and so on. Secondly, I want to make it fun. I don't mean frivolous, but I do believe in hearing the sound of laughter at work, however serious the work. Because if you hear people laugh, you know that they are to some extent relaxing at least a bit. And in that sense of relaxation, rather than being overburdened with stress, what you find is the ability to play. And in play, there is often invention and innovation and so on. And we needed to be innovative in our business. We were trying to pursue a path that not a lot of people had pursued before us. So I'm trying to make work meaningful. I'm trying to make it fun. And I'm genuinely willing to do anything to make the enterprise successful. I used to say to people when they joined us, please understand that we are a moderate-sized consultancy. We can't have strict job demarcation. You know, if someone needs a cup of tea making and you're free, why don't you make it? And if I'm free, I'll make it for you. You know, please understand that, you know, we can't just say that's not my job, you know, and sort of stand on ceremony. We've just got to kind of muck in and help each other out a bit. And I think that's the kind of ethos that I see in good medical teams, in good clinical teams, in good general practice teams. You know, people are willing to do what it takes. You know, I've got a daughter who's a GP, bless her. She's constantly living those messages, and I'm so proud of her. Katie is as an extraordinary doctor and an extraordinary human being, and she's mastered those lessons about it matters, and she also understands implicitly that if you really care about what you do, then a bit you suffer about when you fail because you care, but you can celebrate hugely when you succeed, and it isn't worth turning the care down because from time to time it will hurt. Yeah, it's not worth it. You lose too much. So I think she really understands that. And so my leadership style is about that. It's about vision and purpose on the one hand, the interpersonal relationships, trying to make things fun on the other. And then my leadership style is also, I'm comfortable with being dependent on people who are much better organized, much better planned, much more disciplined than I. And from time to time, therefore, I'm willing to be a soldier rather than a commander.
Have you found the insights in this video useful so far? If so, you might be interested in SEA Blueprint. Just click the link down the description below and sign up, and you will get a teaching from me every day for the next 7 days.
I know a number of leaders who are only too willing to seek help. I know a number of leaders who have got to the top by being good at seeking help and learning from the help that they sought and so on, and benefiting from the help that they sought. I've also seen the leaders try to be complete in and of themselves. Not only do they burn out, but they become a limit to the growth of their organizations. If I've got to be a complete leader, bracket, and no one, remember, I've ever met has been, then what I'm doing by putting myself in the way, in that way, is holding my organization back. And it's even worse when those leaders get found out. I can tell you stories without mentioning names, but one particular leader absolutely staked his reputation on being able to lead the operation well. At the same time, he lost it with his people. So as this process was happening, he had to become firmer and more draconian to get things to happen that he needed to happen in the operation, further alienating the people. And as a consequence, it didn't take more than, I think, 3 years for him to be fired. The chairman just said, enough, out. And the thing about the commercial world is that if you blow it big time and you go. There's no, a period of retraining or whatever. There's no step back and do a little work under supervision and then you get put back into the main job again. No. If you can't hack it, you go. Now, I've known extraordinarily able leaders who are modest and willing to take advice and so on. In many ways, one of the most impressive leaders I've ever assessed told me that he'd been a soldier. And now he was working in a big FTSE 100 organization. It turned out that he'd not just been a soldier, he'd been commanding officer of the SAS. He was colonel in charge of the regiment. He was a remarkable guy. He understood that sometimes he has to ask people to lay down their lives, in order to accomplish the mission. And he said, so how do we operate? Well, we have an awful lot of fun. We spend an awful lot of time building each other up, building the team. And we build and build and build and build and build the team until they are so committed to each other that they will do anything to look after their colleagues. He said, and you must understand that people don't lay down their lives for king and country. They lay down their lives for their mates. So we have to spend our time in the special forces building the team to the point that people understand that sometimes that sacrifice has to be made, and they make it. And he was a remarkable guy. Not a perfect leader, but the closest I'd found yet. I found two people who were close. He was one of them.
One of the things that you highlighted is a trust that people have.
I get asked a lot about trust, so I've done quite a lot of work on it, but not the kind of empirical work that I cite as evidence. But I'll offer you a thought which I've worked on for a long time about trust. I think trust depends on four things. And you'll find coincidentally that they all start with the same letter. That wasn't the intention. That's a pure coincidence, which is another instance because it's C, the letter is C. But it's purely coincidental that they all start with the same letter. So the first is, it's really hard to trust someone who isn't competent. So first of all, make sure you know what you're doing. You don't have to be an expert. You need to know what your limits are and how to be safe, particularly in general practice where, there's no way in the world that the whole world of medicine can be in your head. So you need to know, what you don't know, what you're unsure about, in order to be competent. So first of all, let's not put anything esoteric on the subject of trust. Let's say that trust starts with being competent. The second is, in order to be trusted, you need to care. Now, I don't mean just care about yourself. I mean care about things and people other than yourself. You've got to give a damn. You've got to give a damn about your patients. You've got to give a damn about your colleagues. You've got to give a damn in the context of the NHS about the taxpayer. You've got to give a damn about something more than just you. In fact, caring only about you massively undermines trust. It's called self-orientation, and that is a depleter of trust. So I'd say, first of all, make sure that you are competent. Secondly, make sure that you care about things, people other than you. Yeah. The third is consistency. You can't trust people who one day are like this and the other day are like that. You've got to know that if I work with this colleague and they seem pretty responsible, conscientious, punctilious one day, that the chances are they're going to be pretty much like that tomorrow. Yeah. So they're not flip-flopping around all the time. There's got to be a certain, sometimes people call that integrity, but it's the kind of relentless consistency that gets people trusted. In fact, there's a lovely older book on leadership written in the 1980s called Leaders, The Strategies for Taking Charge. It's by a guy called Bert Nanus, but also by the name's just popped right out of my head. I'll remember it in a moment. But Warren Bennis, that's right, Warren Bennis and Bert Nanus. But they did a study of 90 outstanding leaders, and they wrote about the things that all 90 did, which is quite a test. And one of them was that all 90 were trusted. And what they said about trust and about consistency is that one of the reasons that they were trusted was because of their what they called relentless consistency. And they added as a rider, they weren't all necessarily liked, these leaders, these outstanding leaders, but they were all trusted. And it was because of the consistency. So competence, care, consistency. And the fourth one is perhaps a bit of a surprise. I'm going to argue for just a little bit of courage. You see, there are times that you need to stand for something. You've got to say, I believe in this, or I won't do that. And there are times when that's not comfortable or easy. So my view is that leaders who are trusted are likely to have just a little bit of courage to allow them to mean what they say and say what they mean and do what they say. Yeah, so competence, care, consistency, courage.
That's a good framework to think about the trust. Yeah. And it's been really lovely to speak with you and learn about your journey, David. Is there anything that we haven't touched that you might think would be helpful for our audience?
I'd like to say just a couple of things. What you do matters. It matters enormously. Never doubt at 2 a.m. when you've had a bad day, never doubt that you make the kind of positive difference that we desperately need our doctors to make. It matters what you do. And the second is, don't beat yourself up for not being perfect. You will make mistakes. When my daughter became a doctor, one of the things I said to her on the day she qualified was, Katie, you will make mistakes. I'm not saying you might, I'm saying you will. And who knows, the kinds of mistakes that doctors make might occasionally kill people. It doesn't invalidate all the good things you do, provided you're not doing it deliberately. There is risk inherent in what you do. And we all know that, we all understand that. Don't be afraid of that risk, embrace it. Embrace the hard work to keep you competent and safe within that. When you have a setback, never doubt that what you do makes a difference, a positive difference. And never doubt that however frustrated people may get with the health service at the moment, all of us really need you. So more power to you all.
It's a good place to end, and really enjoy speaking with you, David. And where can people find more about your work?
Tried to write up quite a number of things. The consultation book you've kindly mentioned, but it's now quite old. Even the second edition is quite old. But the leadership stuff, I notice I'm sitting in my wife's study, but she's got a copy of my book. I'll just get it for you. It is here. The leadership stuff I've written up in this book. It's called Leadership No More Heroes. It's published by Springer, by Palgrave Macmillan, which is a Springer company, and was published in 2021. And the book Work-Life Matters is also, I'm trying to write up many of these ideas. I'm just conscious that although I still answer the call to come and give talks to people, there'll come a time when people are absolutely fed up to the back teeth of hearing from me. So I've tried to write these things up so that people can get access to them if they find them helpful. And I just mentioned those things.
Great. I'll put a link down in the description and can check it out and go and get it. Thank you so much. And if you've been watching up until the end, you might want to watch this interview where we talk more about consultation. Click here to watch it. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.